Interest rates future is a derivative contract whereby the value of the contract gains its value from an underlying item, which is the future. For the interest rate future, the company will either buy or sell future. So we have the borrower, and we also have the investor. So the borrower will always sell futures, while the investor will always buy futures. If a company opened by borrowing, the company will close by selling. And if a company opened by selling, the company will close by buying. For the interest rate future, when you sell, you pay interest. When you sell, you pay interest. When you buy, you receive interests. Just like your bond valuation, when a company wants to raise money, the company sells bond. So if the company sells bond to the public, the company raises cash. And the company that sells the bond will be paying interest. So the same thing when a company wants to borrow money, the company is raising money, the company will sell future, company will sell futures. And if a company sells futures, the company will pay interest. In a nutshell, the company will pay interest to open, and the company will receive to close. Now, how is the interest rate quoted when it comes to the future contracts? So let's assume that company ABC wants to borrow $30,000 by December 24th. And interest rates options are quoted as follows: March 93, June 95, September 95.5, and December, let's say 97.0. So if the company is buying a December future, this is the future price. This is the future price here. Future price. While we have the implied interest rates. Implied interest. If the future price is 100, this will be 7. If the future price is 95, which is 100 minus 93. 100 minus 95. This will be 5%. And this will be 100 minus 95.5. That will be 4.5%. There are a couple of things you need to know when dealing with interest rates futures. The first is a borrower will sell futures. Second is the borrower will close by buying futures. So the first step is the decision. What is the decision? Is the company buying futures or selling futures? After the decision, you want to look at the number of contracts. If you are buying the futures, how many contracts will the company be buying? Number of contracts. The next thing you'll be looking at is for the interest rate futures. Most of the time, your examiner expects you to use the lock-in rates. So the next thing you want to look at is how do you calculate the lock-in rates? First of all, you look at the basis. The next is on expired basis. The next is your lock-in rates. If you can have a grasp of this, then it becomes easy to calculate your interest rate future. So what is the lock-in rate here? The lock-in rate is the effective interest rate on that transaction. So we'll be looking at a simple question. Before we go to the question, let me share the steps. So the first thing, determine if the companies will borrow or if the company will be lending. Step number one, a lender or a depositor will buy futures. A borrower will always sell futures. Determine which contract to buy or sell based on the transaction date. The example I gave earlier on, the company needs to buy a December contract. The next step is to consider if the contract will be held till expiration. If contract will be held till expiration, the gain on the futures will be the closing futures interest minus opening futures interest. For a borrower, that's looking at the annualized rates. If contract will be closed before maturity, you will need to calculate basis. You will need to calculate basis. If the contract will be closed before maturity, you will need to calculate basis. The next, you'll be looking at the calculation of the gain on the contract or loss, if any. Then the effective rates. I'll be looking at a simple example here. Simple example on how to solve questions as it regards interest rates futures. Mark PLC wishes to borrow 6 million on 1 March for 6 months. 6 million on 1 March for 6 months. 1 March is the transaction date. 1 March is the transaction date. Assuming today is 30 November, today's date. So there are 3 dates you you must be familiar with: today's date, the transaction date, and the contract expiration date. And interest rate futures are available at the following prices, and contract size is $1 million. Now, this here is the future price, but you will need to calculate the implied interest rate. Implied rates. Mark PLC can borrow at LIBOR plus 1%. Assume that contract expire at the end of the relevant month. 1% is the spread. This is the spread. LIBOR currently is 5%. Assuming LIBOR rises to 5.3 on the transaction date. So this is your opening spot rates. This is the closing spot rates. Now, what do you do with this question? The very first thing you want to do is to make the decision. Will the company be buying the futures, or will the company be selling the future? So you want to first make that decision. Requirements: calculate the gain on the futures. Number 2, calculate the actual interest paid by Mark PLC without the futures. Number 3, calculate the effective interest rates as a result of hedging the exposure using the futures contract. Now, from this question, should the company buy the March futures, June futures, or the September future? Back to our dates. Today is 30 April. And when will be the transaction? The transaction will be on 1 March. So if the transaction will be on 1 March, it means that the company should buy the March futures. But the company can close out the futures before the 31 of March. That's the first decision. How many contracts should the company buy? That's the second decision. How many contracts? So what is the contract size? The contract size is 1 million, and the expected amount is 6 million. So how many contracts should the company buy? But before we go to the number of contracts, your implied interest rate will be 100 minus 94.40. So this will be the implied interest rate. The number of contracts, your formula for number of contracts has to do with your loan all over your contract size, times the loan tenor all over the contract tenor. So you are looking at the loan here is on the numerator, The numerator here also is loan tenor. The denominator is contract size. So contract, denominator, loan, numerator. So the loan tenor is 6 months, while the contract tenor is always 3 months. Always 3 months. Back to the solution. Opening futures price is 5.6, which is 100 minus March future of 94.4. Opening basis. So when the opening futures price is different from the opening spot rates, then that gives rise to basis. So let's look at this. The opening spot rate is how many percent? LIBOR is currently 5%. And the opening futures price here is 5.6, which is 100 minus 94.6. So that means that will give rise to basis. And your basis is your opening future price minus your opening spot rates. So the basis becomes 5.6 minus 5, that is 0.6%. So how do I calculate? The reason I'm calculating the basis is because I want to know the unexpired basis on the transaction date. So how do I know the unexpired basis? Earlier on, I said there are 3 dates that you must be familiar with: today's date, the transaction date, and the contract expiration date. So let me bring out the variable. Here we have our opening futures to be 100 minus 94.40, which gives 5.6%. Basis is equal to opening future price minus opening spot rate. Opening futures price, which is 5.6 minus opening spot rate 5%. That gives 0.6%. So now you want to calculate your unexpired basis. Unexpired basis. How do you do that? Unexpired basis. So there are 3 dates that I said you need to be familiar with. Today's dates, the contracts, the transaction date, then the contract expiration. From the question, today is 30 November. Today is 30 November. And the transaction is on 1 March. The contract expiration is always at the end of every quarter, which is 31 March. So from 30 November, we are assuming that at the end of the contract, this basis of 0.6 will have reduced to 0 in a linear manner. That means every month, a portion will be going till the end of the contract. It will reduce to 0. So from 30 November to 1 March is how many months? We won't count November because already 30th, so December, January, February. That gives you 3 months. So this gives 3 months. Then from March 1 to 31 March gives 1 month. In total, from today to the end of the contract will give 4 months. So at the end of the contracts, we expect the basis to be 0. But the contract was closed out 1 month before expiration. That's the transaction date on 1 March. So it means that the basis from 30 November to 1 March has already expired. So the unexpired basis, or the basis that will be left, will be basis for 1 month. So therefore, let's now calculate the unexpired basis. So we know we have 4 months. 0.6 is basis for 4 months. So let's see what the unexpired basis will be. Unexpired basis will now be 0.6 all over 4. How many months is left before the transaction is closed out? 1 month, so times 1. This gives 0.15%. Having done this, the next thing you want to look at from this point here, you can determine to calculate your lock-in rates, or you calculate the profit or loss. For the requirement in this question, requirement 1 asks for the calculation of the gain on the futures. So remember, since you are calculating gain on futures, what is the gain? The gain will be the opening futures price, or let me say your buying or selling rates. In this question now, the company opened by selling, and the company will close by buying. So the opening futures price in this question here is 5.6%. But we don't know what the closing futures price is. Okay. So closing futures price is equal to closing spot rates plus on expired basis. So in the question, we're told that the closing spot rate will be 5.3. Therefore, your closing spot rates, your closing futures price will now be equal to your closing spot rate, which is 5.3 plus unexpired basis of 0.15%. This will give 5.45%. So what will be the gain or the loss on the contracts? Well, before I calculate the gain or the loss, I want to know how much was hedged. Is it a perfect hedge or is it an imperfect hedge? So number of contracts. The gain will be based on the number of contracts. Number of contracts. Hedged amount is 6 million. Contract size is 1 million. So number of contracts will now be equal to 6 million, which is the loan amount, all over 1 million. This is a contract size times the loan tenor. The loan is for how many months? The loan is supposed to be a 6-month loan. So this will be 6/3. So 3 goes here, 3 goes here, that's 2. That become 12 contracts. So the number of contracts is 12 contracts. So what will be the gain or the loss on 12 contracts? So let's see if the company will be making a gain or if the company will be making a loss. Closing futures price is 5.45. And the opening futures price is 5.6. So gain or loss. Opening futures price. The company opening by selling, which means the company will pay interest at 5.6%. Closing futures price. Company will close by receiving interest. So the company will receive interest at 5.45%. Will the company be making a gain or a loss in this instance? To look at it, you're paying interest at 5.6 and you are receiving at 5.45. Company is going to make a loss because the payment is higher than the receipt. So the loss will be 0.5.6 minus 4.45. That will be 0.15. Let's look at the total loss on that transaction, or the total loss on the transaction. So this will be 0.15 times 6 million, which is the hedged amount. Like 6 million. It's gonna be for 6 months times 6. The loan tenor is 6 months, so 6/12. The loss there is 4,500. 4,500. That's the Roman figure 1. That's first requirement. The second requirement is the actual interest paid. Roman figure or number 2. Actual interest paid. So the actual interest paid will be determined by the closing spot rate. So that will be closing spot rate plus spread. The closing spot rate plus the spread. And the closing spot rate was 5.3. And the company can borrow at 1% above NIBOR. Company can borrow at 1% above NIBOR. So that would be 5.3 closing spot rate plus 1%. So that gives 6.3%. So without the contract, the company would have paid interest at 6.3%. In monetary term, this will be 6.3 times 6 million times the loan tenor is 6 months, 6/12. That will be 6 months interest rate. In monetary term, this will give $189,000. The third thing to calculate, number 3, is the effective interest rate. So using your lock-in rate, the formula is effective rate. So the formula is your opening futures price minus unexpired basis plus the spread. So your opening futures price is 5.6 minus unexpired basis of 0.15 plus the spread of 1%. Let's see what that will give us. It will give 6.45%. 5%. So a recap for your interest rate future, the company that is borrowing will always sell future. That means the company will pay interest to open and receive interest to close. Secondly, you need to calculate number of contracts, which is the loan, so the number of contracts. The formula is loan amounts all over contract size times loan tenor all over contract tenor. The next thing you want to calculate is your basis, which is opening futures price minus opening spot rates. Then you go for that to calculate on expired basis. So in the question that the examiner did not tell you to calculate profits or loss, the moment you calculate your unexpired basis, the next thing you want to calculate is the effective rates. Effective rates, which is equal to your opening futures price minus unexpired basis. That is the summary of the interest rates futures. So any question on interest rates futures is a summary of how to solve such question.